Glenn Greenwald made some good points while I was on the Crystal, Kyle, and Friends podcast over a month ago. Yeah, I'm that slow. By the way, podcasts are an interesting idea. Just saying. But these points were good enough that we're going to listen, discuss, and repeat.
The ways in which we end up interacting with and navigating through societal sectors and institutions of authority very much are based on how our personalities form in childhood. And so, I've talked about this before, like, I do think my formative experience in childhood was discovering that I was gay and that I was living in a society that had, before I even had a chance to, understand why, had decided that it was evil and sick and broken. This is like the late 70s going into the early 80s with Reagan and the moral majority and the AIDS epidemic being the only time, homosexuality was discussed. And I think, a lot of gay kids dealt with that trauma, and it is a trauma to realize that the society has decided that something inside of you that you have to hide because it's so shameful is terrible. Some gay kids create an alternative world, which is why I think a lot of gay people thrive in the creative arts, and that's how you get David Bowie or Alexander McQueen or Tchaikovsky or whomever. And then other gay kids are you know what, I'm going to prove to the society that I'm just like they are, that I'm totally normal in every way except this one little thing, so they should love me. And those are the assimilationists, and that's how you get Pete Buttigieg or Ellen. And then you get kids who internalize the judgment, oh wow, I really am sick and evil and dirty and broken. And those are the gay kids who kill themselves or who have mental health pathologies. And my response to it was to say, wait, how is it that you got to be, what is your competence to have formulated this judgment about me and then impose it on me? Let me instead put you under this judgmental microscope and question your own moral standing. And what is it about you that we ought to be looking at and perhaps condemning? And I think that early experience of questioning the entitlement of authoritative pronouncements and the foundation of their right to make them was obviously something that, helped me a lot in all the work I've done as an adult as well.
Imagine coming of age, realizing you are hated for what you are. Not for what you believe, or even for something you did, but for something you cannot change. For some of you, this won't be too hard to imagine. Of course it's a trauma. It's going to affect who you are for the rest of your life. It's tough being different in a socially unacceptable way. I'm not talking about being a bisexual woman or something like that. I'm talking about being something people actually actively hate. Something about which you hear people vocalize their disgust daily. And there you are, having to decide what to do with yourself. Now, flip it. Imagine you hate others for what they are, for things about themselves they cannot change. For some of you, this won't be too hard. The world can be an ugly place, and there you are, contributing to it. What a good guy you are. The model that there exist 3 ways of responding is solid. Essentially, overcompensation, self-loathing, and let's call it badassery. For the overcompensators, let me say this. There has never been anything more cucked than embracing the religion of your conquerors. If you're a self-loather, you've come to the right channel. I wish you could have found me sooner. You need to hear someone like me tell you there's nothing wrong with you. And not only is what's inside of you not evil, it's not even uncommon. Like everything else in you, it's there for easily understandable evolutionary reasons. Join me and turn the spotlight around. It's society that needs judging. Question everything. Conventional thinking is wrong disturbingly often. We need as many voices as possible pointing out the obvious flaws in the orthodoxy.
I think humanity is very complicated. I think it's very rare that there's great moral clarity about any person or anything. Which doesn't mean you shouldn't feel passionate about things or believe strongly in the things that you believe, but I think there has to be a humility that's married to it based on the fact that as human beings, we're extremely subjective, tribal. We do judge everything through a subjective prism, and above all else, we're fallible, right? Like the pieties and orthodoxies most deeply held in one generation become the source of shame of the next. I mean, that's just the history of human evolution and intellect and thought. And so to think that we're somehow outside of that and immune to it, I think requires a hubris that staggers me. Like this idea that, I have a certain view that is so indisputably and eternally correct that nobody should be allowed even to dissent from it is one that just like offends my sensibility. And I think that, so often, as I said before, we were talking about before, like because we are social animals, societal pressure and mob behavior and kind of the overwhelming consensus imposes a lot of pressure and a lot of coercion on us to join with it, because it's always easier to join with it than it is to stand opposed to it. There are way more rewards from being part of it. There's way less risk and recrimination. And, I do have the personality type that instinctively wants to find kind of the things that societal consensus might have been overlooking, that might actually be flawed in the certainty. Probably in part it's because I did feel like an outcast from being gay early on, and I felt like I had been unfairly condemned and denounced by a corrupt societal structure, and so am skeptical of the kind of nobility and righteousness of those same dynamics to judge others. But I also think that, it comes from, it goes back to that question that I was talking about with my grandfather before. Like, I have confidence in my abilities. I have, faith in my integrity and like my ability to mount an argument and to like defend myself. So I feel like, then the question becomes like, how am I going to use that? Am I going to use that to just bolster what is already kind of the most powerful force in any dynamic or any conflict, just to kind of jump on board and ride it? Or am I going to use it to try and, give voice to things that maybe don't have voice, any other way to get a platform? And my instinct just early on has always been, as you say, to kind of side with the unlicensed, like the unauthorized, the outcast, and I think that doesn't necessarily mean that each time I do it, I'm in the right. But I think we need that someone fulfilling that role in society for some kind of balance.
The pieties and orthodoxies most deeply held in one generation become the source of shame of the next. Oh, if I could get the world to learn that one lesson. All I'm asking is the smallest quantum of self-doubt. Just enough that you don't rationalize the use of prisons against people with a lifestyle different from your own. Am I asking too much? If you can't remember that your neighbor is human, then at least remember that you are. While on the topic of humility, let's talk about our influences. Because we know the targets of sex shaming change from generation to generation, we can come to the same conclusion as Greenwald. You, dear listener, did not come to your views in a vacuum. If everyone were raised in their own isolated bubbles, then at worst, everyone would hate something different. No, you were taught what to hate. It remains an open question as to whether or not you can unteach yourself. Myself, I was a natural-born contrarian. I was born with what I call Wile E. Coyote syndrome. I don't root against someone simply because I'm told he's the bad guy. It bothers me that he always has to lose, and it bothers me more that it doesn't bother anyone else. This is how I've come to my views. What society tells me is most wrong is where I start looking for what's right. It's not like society is always wrong, but even where I agree that the majority position gets it mostly right, I put some thought into getting there. As a side note, you can imagine how I felt when I first saw the term NPC. Yeah, you will forgive me if I throw that one around from time to time. But anyway, it sounds like Greenwald shares my personality quirk. It would explain why he's one of the very best journalists in the world. I'd love to interview him, but if he answers with integrity, it could end his career. Nonetheless, Invitation openly extended.